Hello. So we're going to continue with chapter 10 in the book. Here are just a couple of things that I'd like to call attention to. One thing from 10.1 that I did not sort of talk about last time because there was a lot of stuff to talk about is the figure of Theseus. Theseus is the hero for the city of Athens, and I would maintain that he is a manufactured hero. In other words, there may have been some local hero named Theseus. But what happens is in the 5th century BCE, this is after the Battle of Marathon in 490, and then the Battle of Plataea and Salamis, where Athenian forces, and in the case of Plataea, Spartan and Athenian forces, defeated the Persian army a second time. Athens was very much on the rise. Athens had become a world city. It had become an important city in the region. And Sparta had always had sort of that status in southern Greece, but Athens not so much. In the Iliad, for instance, Athens has a very small force, unlike Sparta, which has a fairly large force, and none of the Athenian heroes do anything remarkable in the Iliad. So Athens is sort of a backwater town. Now Theseus would be in the generation before, the same generation as Hercules, and what happens is stories get developed where Theseus becomes Hercules' wingman. He goes with him on adventures and so forth. That again is likely Athenian versions of the story have increased the importance of Theseus. And I think the reason for this is Athens really didn't have a backstory. But now Athens is a major city, and they have to sort of come up with some major, like some major myth stuff or legend stuff to back up their claim that they are, in fact, an important city. Now, there's an event that happens in 475 BCE. An Athenian politician and general named Cimon. Cimon finds on Skyros, which is an island Theseus supposedly had been exiled to at the end of his life. Cimon was getting rid of pirates there. There were pirates who were sort of headquartered there, and he swept the pirates, their operation, demolished it, and the pirates went, scattered. So the piracy threat was lessened. But while he was there, apparently they did some digging, and they found the burial site of Theseus. They took the bones, which apparently were the bones of a 7-foot person, and they claimed they were the bones of Theseus, and they brought them back to Athens, where they were reburied, and there was a shrine to Theseus set up in Athens. I'm guessing that Athens has now become sort of a local power. They're building up their reputation, and I think the Theseus stories all come from then and later, and they don't really have much going before that. The scholarship in chapter 10 brings up an interesting guy, a Russian folklorist named Vladimir Prop. And the work that is referred to and there's an excerpt from is his work called Morphology of the Folktale. It came out in 1928. Prop looked at 100 quest stories. So there was a catalog of Russian folk tales, and he looked at 100, it was like 501 to 601 or something like that in the number. So in other words, it was literally a catalog of tales, and he basically took a certain amount of tales. He looked at those tales, and what he found was that there were 7 character types that appeared in the tales, and not all 7 appear in every tale, but these would be like the hero, the dispatcher, the person who sends him on his mission, because these are quest stories, so these are mission stories. A donor who gives him something. So oftentimes the hero gets a special piece of equipment. Think Star Wars, Luke gets the lightsaber, right, that had been his father's. that type of thing is is important in the story. The villain, of course, the prize or the princess that has to be saved. So there are these character types, and that there were 31 functions. And what Prop means by functions is he means narrative story elements. So these would be things like the hero finds out about this thing that has to be got. Or he hears about the princess in distress, and then he goes in, to rescue the princess. Now, one of the things that Prop found was not all 31 appear in every folk story. In fact, probably no folk story has all 31, but they always appear in the same order. So the way he lays them out, they're always in that order. So you can't have function number 30 coming after function number 12. Or function number 15 coming before number 2, that sort of thing. So, and a lot of it's pretty obvious. I mean, obviously the first few motifs are all about him getting the call, getting some sort of thing that indicates he has to go on the mission. Obviously that has to happen first in the narrative arc. He can't be on the mission and then get the call. That's not going to work out. So some of it's pretty straightforward and pretty sensible. But the fact that he found this very strong similarity between folk tales as far as their narrative form goes is actually an important idea, and it's worth considering when looking at the stories we have from the Greeks. The comparison section actually has selections from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which tell about the hero Gilgamesh, who's a Mesopotamian hero from about 17 or 1800, and Aeneas, the Trojan hero. He's on the Trojan side in the Iliad, but he becomes the founder of Rome indirectly. He doesn't found the city of Rome, but he sets up a settlement in Italy. And from that settlement comes Rome, centuries later. The key thing here is that Gilgamesh is a lot like Achilles. He is sort of a self-absorbed hero. He's king of Uruk, and when we first meet him, he is lording it over the people. Right? He's king. He can do what he wants. So if he sees a young woman he wants, basically he's going to have sex with her. It doesn't matter whether she objects. Doesn't matter whether her family objects. Doesn't matter whether her husband objects. That's going to happen. And so that gets to be a problem. The people pray to the gods, and the gods send a guy named Enkidu down, and he and Gilgamesh have a big fight. Neither can defeat the other. They become best of friends, and then Gilgamesh turns his power, his life force or whatever, outwardly, so that he can go and conquer monsters and actually help his people and help the civilization, rather than doing what he had been doing, which was being basically a real jerk. And of course, both Achilles and Gilgamesh lose their best friend. Achilles loses Patroclus, and Gilgamesh loses Enkidu dies. So Aeneas is sort of different thing. In the Aeneid, the main thing where we see Aeneas, he is a hero marked by the quality called pietas. This is a Latin word. In English it comes out as piety, but pietas is not piety. It means a sense of duty, that you know what your duty is and then you do your duty. That's the key, like a soldier. It's a soldier sort of thing. Now, that's important because in the Roman Empire, what matters is that you put yourself at the service of the Roman state, that you advance Rome's cause, right? That's what the hero is supposed to do in a Roman setting, and that's what Aeneas does. That's quite a different hero than Achilles. I mean, Achilles puts the Greeks at risk to build up his reputation. He's quite willing to let every Greek die as long as he comes away and people remember him as such an important figure. That is a horrific idea towards the Romans, and Aeneas, of course, doesn't show that. In the selection, though, there is one thing I want to bring to your attention. That's the very end of Book 12, and we have the very end. We have the very end of the selection is actually the very end of the epic. Turnus, who's the Italian champion, and Aeneas are fighting. Of course, Aeneas has to win, but after he wins, his first inclination is to spare Turnus, and then he sees this war belt that a friend of his had, and the friend got killed, and he then runs Turnus through. But what's crucial about this is, as a sense, some people say, well, he's just dispensing justice. And that's one way to read that. But the way it's described is problematic, because he's going to show mercy, which is advanced as a good thing. The victor should not actually rub it into the conquered, but rather they should be allowed to have some part in later development. So in other words, you don't kill people who surrendered, but you take them as prisoner, and then after the war is over, you try to make some sort of arrangement that doesn't totally debase and disgrace the fallen. But that's on paper what you're supposed to do. What happens here is he's going to do that. So that's basically sort of what a Roman should do. And then he sees the belt, and basically his mind goes blank, or goes black even, and he just runs the guy through. And the last lines of it basically have Turnus's soul like leaving his body and going screaming to hell, to the underworld. End of story. I mean, ends on that moment of killing and death. That's a strange ending for the epic, because what does that say about this whole idea of pietas? Because in the final moment, Aeneas forgets that. He is not doing pietas. He's not doing necessarily what's going to advance the Roman cause. He's in a personal vendetta, and he basically, in effect, loses his mind for a moment. And it also refers back to the very beginning of the poem in Book 1, where Juno attacks the Trojan fleet that's on its way to Italy with this tremendous storm. And Virgil asks the reader, does this make any sense? Can a god, can a divine being be so consumed with ira, with anger, with like this wrath, that it basically loses its mind? And here we have it at the end, as if like Aeneas, who's been this sort of model figure for most of the epic, suddenly loses his mind in this moment of vengeance. And anyway, it's, I think it's an amazing ending, but it's very problematic. And then the Nachleben section, the section dealing with the afterlife of in this case, Achilles, looks at the figure of Achilles in war poetry, modern war poetry. So there's a poem from World War I, there's a poem from World War II, and there's a poem from the Troubles. This is the sort of civil war in Northern Ireland between the Protestants and Catholics. So you can look at that and how Achilles features in each of those. Now, I have this reference below to Vietnam, and that is actually, I think, referred to earlier in the chapter, but it sort of belongs here because it's like the Nachleben of Achilles. A doctor and a professor named Jonathan Shea. He's a doctor at Mass General Hospital. He's a professor at Harvard Medical School. He's a professor of psychiatry, so he worked with these focus groups of Vietnam vets. They would support groups, and he had them read the Iliad in a translation, and then they talked about it. And there were a lot of things about that war poem that really resonated with the men and helped them sort of process their own feelings. So, for instance, the gods, the way the gods appear in the Iliad, the gods often do stuff, and then they party, right? Then they're having dinners and stuff. It's as if nothing happened. But for the humans, it's a tremendous, like, there's a lot of suffering because of divine action. And that reminded these Vietnam vets of the generals who weren't in Vietnam, right, but were in some boardroom somewhere plotting strategy, but the men were dying on the line. So that type of thing Jonathan Shea in his book called Achilles in Vietnam, a book which I heartily recommend. It's very readable, and I think it does show you how you can take a piece of literature and use it as a way to process. So I think that's enough information for you to sort of move ahead this week as we finish chapter 10. So good studying.